Good afternoon. Well, you've almost made it to the finish line. It's been an incredible marathon. It's been a lot of fun. We have a great luncheon panel, actually panels for you. We also are not through at lunch. We have a great lineup coming up immediately after lunch and a wonderful closing panel at 4 o'clock. But before we get there, one brief administrative announcement, and that is for those of you who may have been planning to go to Ayan Hirsi Ali. Unfortunately, she had a minor health emergency in her family and had to cancel at the last minute, so she will not be here this afternoon, and she sends her regrets. Okay, this for me is the most important part of the conference. So I'm really asking for your attention here for a minute or two. If you want to talk through the governor and Mike Milken and Kevin De León, that's okay. But right now, I'm asking for silence, please. Okay. This is an amazing event, but it's only possible because of an incredible amount of hard work. So what I want to do is to take this time to thank the people who have made this possible. Their hard work, their dedication to create this really incredible event that you've experienced over the last few days is just, you just can't, I think, maybe many of you do appreciate how much they've done. So over the course of the year, my colleagues develop, plan, and execute more than 150 events, but this conference is the biggest by far. And while their names are appearing on the screen, as they are now, I'd like to ask all of them who are in the room now to stand up for those of them who are seated, which is only a few, and to stand and wave their hands for those in the back, because I want right now to thank each and all of them, as well as thanking the companies that have helped to make this possible and worked with us. So let me now ask them to raise their hands, to stand up, and please join me in thanking them. Okay, now on to a little bit moving toward our lunch program. In keeping, of course, with our location, this is a Hollywood double bill. The first part will be a conversation on California with a panel of very distinguished Californians, Kevin De León, Mike Milken, and Governor Jerry Brown. I normally don't choke up when I say his name, but all right. But we're going to start with a quiz question. I want to test your California IQ. For those of you who weren't here earlier, and I don't know why you weren't, let me just remind you that to answer, you just get your cell phone or get out your smartphone and text the code next to the number in there. Text it to 22333. All right, so that's what you do. You text it to 22333. Here's the question. Contrary to popular belief, politics in the Golden States predates Jerry Brown. Now, which city in 1849 hosted California's first constitutional convention? Those of you who are not from California, we will excuse you for not knowing this, but for those who are, and we have more of you as a percentage of the audience than we do Monday and Tuesday today, here are the questions. Is it Eureka? And if it is, you do GC 157A. Is it Monterey? In which case you do GC 157B. Sacramento, GC 157C. Oakland, GC 157D. And San Francisco, GC 157E. So go ahead and mark your answers. Okay, we still have people voting. moving back and forth. I don't know about you, but I find this graphic fascinating. Sort of mesmerizing as you watch it. Okay, I think we have enough votes in here. No, got some more. More coming in. All right, I'm gonna call time. All right, so the votes are in, and 30% of you thought it was Eureka, which just seems sort of logical because of the phrase. 31% San Francisco, 12% Oakland, 9% Sacramento, and 18% Monterey. Well, let's see what you know. It's Monterey. Somebody voted after they saw the answer. That's not fair. You don't get a prize for that. Okay. It's a great. You did well enough on that. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds because I left the next question at my seat, and I'm going to run up and get it and bring it right back. So keep talking for about 10 seconds. Okay, here's the next question. This one is designed to help warm you up for part 2 of today's program. So again, have your cell phone ready. Here's the question. Hollywood studios are more focused than ever on creating films that travel well to other countries. Have your attention on this a little bit, only because I think you'll like the questions. Which of the following is not the Chinese version of an American film title? A, Six Naked Pigs, The Full Monty. B, Cranky Old Man and Waitress, As Good as It Gets. C, Interplanetary Unusual Attacking Team, for Guardians of the Galaxy. D, Touring Around on a Flying House, for Up. And E, Seabed General Mobilization, for Finding Nemo. Now these are, all but one of these are the real translations. So, for those of you who think you know the answers, please start voting. And what you're voting for is, remember, which is not the Chinese version of an American title. So if you vote for it as not being the Chinese version, that's the one you want. Everything else you say is. Not going. All right, I'm feeling. I was as a Guardians of the Galaxy fan, I was feeling badly that it wasn't getting any votes, but I feel better now. Okay, all right, you seem to, now, little movement again. Giving you about, since there's enough voting, I'm going to give you a few seconds more. Few seconds more. All right, time is up. Time is up. You're still voting even though I said time's up. That's really a lot of cheating one. Okay, let us see which of the following is not the Chinese version of an American film title. Let's see which it is. It's Cranky Old Man and Waitress, which is As Good as It Gets. Okay. And the actual Chinese title for that is, wait, you have to hear this, it's Mr. Cat Poop. That is the actual title. All right. We'll hear more about this as we get to our next session. But now it's time to move to our panel. And so let me introduce three very distinguished Californians, led by our chairman, Mike Milken. Please join me in welcoming Governor Brown and the leader of the Senate, Kevin De León.
Well, Senator, thank you for joining us. And the exciting thing about you, Governor Brown, is wherever you go, you make news. So it's quite exciting from that standpoint. So the governor announced an executive order this morning to cut carbon emissions by 40% from 1990 levels by 2030. So, Governor, why now? How is this different from the state's previous goals?
Well, it's different because we have a 2020 goal, which is to achieve renewable energy at a level of 1/3 of the electrical generation, 1/3, and we have a goal of reducing our greenhouse gases by 2020 to a certain amount, but we're nowhere near where we have to end up in 2050. So we've set an interim target, 2030, which is the most aggressive of any carbon reduction target anywhere in North America. And I want to just say this about it. A few years ago, many people in the electrical business said you can never get to 20% electricity generated by renewable energy. California today is already at 25%. And what I think we really can appreciate here is through three governors, Governor Davis, Governor Schwarzenegger, and now myself, there's been a California effort that is unique in that we have taken steps ourselves to deal with reducing emissions. Now, just put it in the big framework. You've got leaders in Congress, the majority, who say there is no climate challenge. There's not a problem, and we're not going to do anything about it. Now, you have President Obama. He's trying to do what he can do by executive order. In California, we have both executive action and we have legislative action, and it's gone going on for about 10 years. So I just want to say that this stimulates innovation. And in California, there is something called global warming. We're 4 degrees warmer than we were historically when you go back and check 150 years ago. Our forest fire season is months longer. It's almost year-round. This is real stuff. And we're going to have to not only do what we can to reduce carbon emissions, we're going to have to start adapting our infrastructure and making it more resilient. So there's a lot to do, and the nature of what we're doing in California is to leave a maximum of flexibility to the private sector, and they are innovating in battery technology, in building efficiency, in grid sophistication. In many, many ways, this is a very good combination. I'll just conclude by saying Bloomberg came out with an analysis that California was the #1 state for business. If you take the Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered in California and look at their growth, their market capitalization, they have done better than the national average in any other state. So growth, economic strength, and environmental stewardship go together, and that's what we're moving on. Pragmatic, visionary, and very collaborative with our legislative partners.
Thank you, Governor. Senator. As the head of our state Senate, this December in Paris, the United Nations will host its climate change conference. How will California be represented in that conference?
Well, Michael, a couple things. One is I want to congratulate the governor for the executive order, the announcement today with regards to carbon reduction upwards up to 40%. It is significant. The governor has shown that obviously California doesn't just lead the region or the nation, but leads the entire country. I had the great privilege to be with administration officials of Governor Brown and to lead a delegation to the COP20, Conference of Parties of 20 in Lima, Peru, just a few months ago. And for me, it was astounding to see so many countries, whether you're Mexico, China, India, Canada. Everybody wanted to know what is California's next step. And the reality is very few folks are looking towards Washington, D.C. for leadership on the issue of climate. So California is known as a subnational. Obviously, when it comes to the Conference of Parties 20 in Paris, France, the executive branch through the State Department leads the negotiations, respectively. But California, as a subnational, will have a leading role in Paris, France. Obviously, we have shown that we can have a cap-and-trade market that can work quite successfully in comparison to other parts of the world. And a couple things are really critical to really underscore. One is that it's critical, obviously, for public health reasons and for economic catastrophe that is on the horizon if we don't deal with the issue of climate, that we grow this economy simultaneously. The fact that California just surpassed recently Brazil to become the 7th largest economy in the entire world speaks volumes with our current cap-and-trade scheme that we have in California. We have more capital invested in this state than any other state in the country when it comes to investments in clean technology. And as the governor just underscored with regards to generation from electricity from renewable sources, it's upwards up to 25%. So the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities in California, have done a remarkable job. Now, we put forth, following the governor's vision, a framework for 50-50-50, 50% reduction in petroleum use by the year 2030 in California, 50% generation of electricity from renewable sources. That's from 33% upwards up to 50, and 50% energy efficiency of the current stock of buildings we have in California. The one thing that's absolutely critical is California is a leader globally, but we're not an island unto ourselves. So we can't have the most far-reaching progressive climate change policies of other regions in the country, and other countries are not following California. So we have to be pragmatic in reaching our carbon reduction goals, but we're going to have to grow this economy simultaneously, and I think we're proving that right here in California.
Thank you, Senator. Now, Governor, your 4th term. Can you talk to us a little bit, maybe as you think about the previous terms, of the cooperation here between the Speaker of the State Assembly, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, and yourself on this issue, and think back over previous administrations in terms of your attempts at cooperation on this issue?
Well, I'm going to go back quickly, but just for a moment. California has been in a unique position ever since smog was first recognized and named in Los Angeles by scientists at Caltech. And under President Nixon and the governorship of Ronald Reagan, a federal waiver provision was created that allowed California to have more stringent and different tailpipe emission standards. So starting there, California's always been leading the way. And in fact, today, the national standard of 52 miles to the gallon will have to be reached in the next several years. That came from California first. So we've had a history. Now, this history, Governor Davis signed a bill on tailpipe emissions, which is a significant part of the carbon emissions that we have to deal with. And then Governor Schwarzenegger signed another bill that set this larger goal of reducing greenhouse gases and creating a market called the cap and trade system, whereby the market sends a signal by putting a price on carbon and allows companies to respond in whatever creative way they can. And so there is a collaboration. It's a collaboration over time that I would argue goes back to people of very different political personalities and persuasions, namely President Nixon and Governor Reagan, going forward through Governor Davis and Governor Schwarzenegger and now myself. And yes, the legislature and the executive are pretty much in sync on this. We are working with Republicans and Democrats. Now, there are differences. I don't want to minimize that. But we're dealing, and it's a hard thing to do when you're dealing with concrete things, return on investment, specific issues. You got the problems in the Middle East, the Iranian nuclear deal and all that. I mean, this is immediate. We got violence in Baltimore. Those are hot, and they're immediate. But we've got a slow rolling crisis that if we don't deal with it, before we know it, we will have passed a tipping point, an irreversible tendency that will be melting the Antarctic ice cap in Greenland, raising sea level, causing temperature rises, I don't want to go through all the parade of horribles, but it is serious, it is catastrophic, and it's longer term. So the biggest problem in politics, we're always today. What's the headline today? This isn't news, but it's important stuff. And California, because of the collaboration with the legislature and my predecessors, we are setting the way. And it's not just California off by itself. I've personally met with and discussed this with the president of China, and many of his high officials and departments have signed an MOU with me. The same is true with Quebec, British Columbia, Mexico, Peru, and in some of the states of Germany. So little California, which is the 7th largest political jurisdiction, is pioneering. And the fact that the head of the Environmental Committee in the Senate puts a snowball in his hand and say no climate change, well, that's magical thinking. It's pretty silly. So we're going forward. We got the backing of our legislature, and it's an iterative, collaborative process. And we have businesses that are sprouting up here. 40% of the electric cars that are bought in America are bought in California. And we are projecting millions of not only electric cars, but combustion cars that are much more efficient, and natural gas and hydrogen. So it's like when you have war, and when Hitler was marching on Germany, you know, we didn't have any great airplane factories going and tank factories, but when Roosevelt leading, we transformed the whole economy. Well, dealing with the threat of climate change is going to require an analogous mobilization through the private sector, but with government setting the goals. And that's exactly what we're doing in California. It's very exciting, and this may be my 4th term, maybe, because you never know what the legislature will do. They might change the term limits. But they'd have to go to vote of the people, and I doubt whether they'd want to do that. But I think we can get a lot done. And by the way, it's not, you have to be able to chew gum and jump rope at the same time. We got to keep the budget balanced. We have to deal with jobs. We have to deal with the drought, agriculture, police relations. We do all that stuff. But while doing all the different elements of what it is to be a developed society as California is, we got to deal with this big overarching threat that is recognized by over 95% of the climate scientists of the world. So there's no doubt about this stuff. And we got to do something. And California is very much in the forefront. And that's all I got to say. So there we are.
So, Governor, I've noticed, we saw today on the wire that there's some reviews in already on this policy. World Bank Group President Jim Kim, 4 consecutive years of exceptional drought has brought home the harsh reality of rising global temperatures to communities and businesses in California. There can be no substitute for aggressive national targets to reduce harmful greenhouse emissions, but the decision today by Governor Brown to set 40% reduction targets for 2030 is an example of climate change leadership that others might follow, the head of the World Bank. Senator, part of that was related to the drought in water. In addition to the governor and the state assembly, what is the Senate looking at as it relates to water?
Well, obviously, there's a scarcity of water. The drought has impacted a lot of folks throughout the state, especially in the Central Valley. The Central Valley exports about 50% of food to the rest of the nation. In the Central Valley, even though we're the 7th largest economy in the world, if you disaggregate the data, Silicon Valley, South San Francisco, it sort of feels like the Gilded Age. In Los Angeles, Orange County, as well as San Diego, the economy is really starting to take off. But when you disaggregate the data and you look at certain parts of the state, you have a lot of folks who haven't felt the positive economic resurgence. That's especially acute in the Central Valley, where you have a lot of farm workers and a lot of families who are on food lines today as we speak because of the scarcity of water, because of crops, fields that have been fallowed out. So, working very closely with the governor, we're moving together with a concert of legislative bills to deal with the issue of water conservation. It's about behavior modification. We don't know if this is a new normal, but I will say this, given that last year was the hardest year recorded in the state of California, given the fact that we have historic low snowpacks in the Sierras, well, we get a lot of our water through the Delta from the north to Southern California. The reality is this. Carbon emissions atmospherically are impacting the economy of California. Now, we are a resilient economy. We were down and out a few years ago with the worst economic recession since 1929. A lot of the political pundits, folks on the Eastern Seaboard, sort of counted out California. California goes through its ups and downs, unquestionably, but I'll say one thing about California is you can never count us out. We are resilient, our spirit is strong. We will fall down again in the future, no doubt about it, but we'll get back again stronger. The policies we move forward, working with the governor and our colleagues on the assembly, are going to be absolutely critical with regards to behavior modification and water conservation. What we do, we have to do much more with less, but we also have to deal with the issue of growing this economy and dealing with climate. We see an opportunity in California to create more jobs, jobs that are real, jobs that are tangible, jobs that can be outsourced or offshored, that put people to work that are intensively laborious. Therefore, the investments coming into California are phenomenal when it comes to clean technology, but also we're going to have to look toward the innovators in Silicon Valley and Los Angeles for technologies with regards to water conservation.
Governor, I know you have a lot of ideas today on water. The idea of cutting water usage by 25% and a number of other areas. What are some of your strategies here as relates to water in the state?
Okay. I want to, again, put this in a larger frame. The drought is a challenge. And if we understand the challenge and we rise to the occasion, we respond. And that's how, if you look at the theory of history, great nations arise by facing challenges. In fact, Arnold Toynbee, the great English historian, had a whole theory of history, challenge and response. So we are looking at the climate change, we're looking at the drought. Now, what are some of the strategies? We're wasting millions of acre feet of water. Orange County has a great recycling system. They don't like to think of toilet to tap. You don't like to think about drinking your toilet water, but you can make it as clean as the water on that table.
I just don't know if Stuart and Linda
he won't want to say that.
are going to feel that.
Well, you have to have confidence in this filtration system. But there's still a lot of agricultural users that can go to drip irrigation and more efficient means. We can recapture groundwater. A lot of that stormwater runs in, runs out. There's millions of acre feet that we can avail ourselves. And there'll be various kinds of storage. So we're looking at this thing in many different ways, but we're not going to run out of water. It's not possible. We may have to desalinate. By the way, the first desalinization is the dirty water right at home. The water from agriculture, the runoff, the gray water running from your showers, your toilets, that is recycled. Then we're already getting a desalinization in San Diego. It's been a hell of a struggle. I had to get on the phone and arbitrate between the local water control board and another regulatory agency to help this company get going. It's still expensive. But as the costs of energy can stabilize through renewable energy, as the technology gets better, we got that big ocean out there for water. So my message is these problems are the very stimuli we need to be greater than we are. And that innovation, Silicon Valley has companies that 20 years ago didn't exist. There are companies that have products that 3 years ago they didn't know what they were. They didn't even know about them. So it's that inventiveness. It's the state of imagination, which is the state of California. So yes, the drought is causing some problems. Some people in the Central Valley have to truck in water. They have no water coming out of their tap. In Brazil, Sao Paulo, they turn the water off at 5 o'clock. In the afternoon, they don't turn it on again until the morning. We're not going to go there. And now, the drought, if it lasts another year and another year, and it could, we'll have to take even more significant measures. But I'm very optimistic on California because we're not bound by the obvious, and we're not hampered by so many old fogey ideas. And even though I'm kind of an old fogey, I'm still a radical thinker when it comes to California and what we can do. So we're going to take care of the drought.
Governor, no one who's ever visited you at that loft in downtown Oakland will think of you as an old fogey. I can promise you that. And one of the challenges that the governor and the senator want to turn to the community that's here and those that are watching this online is that the financial community did rise up in other challenges and develop ideas from a financial standpoint to create incentives. And we were honored at the Milken Institute to work with our innovation group in this area, Dr. Sandor led us with the idea. We had this sulfur dioxide problem, SO2. And we had acid rain in large parts of the country, and there was a series of movies. Large parts of our population were at risk for their life to acid rain. And by creating sulfur index bonds and credits where you could sell it if you reduced, in just a short period of time of 15 years, pretty much eliminated this issue. And I know the governor and the senator want to challenge you again to develop these new financial models. So governor, senator, I just want to give you a quick little look at the beauty of our state and the fact that we do have this coastline. And many years ago, I had moved 1,200 people here to California, most of which still lives here. And so whether it's the largest alpine lake, the lowest point in the North America, the highest point in the continental United States, our beautiful coastline, one of the few places in the world that you can compete in a ski and surf competition the same day. This is our opportunity. Senator, what is your call to action for those that are with us today and watching this video?
Oh my God, that's such a big question. I would say you got to believe in California. It's a safe bet in the long term. What we're doing here with regards to technologies is unlike any other place. We got some great places in the country. Massachusetts, where obviously there's a lot of venture capital, a lot of investments with regards to biotech, precision medicine, but we're doing this out here in California as well with the University of California, San Francisco. You got Cal, you got Stanford, UCLA, Caltech, USC, University of California, San Diego. I can't emphasize this enough and underscore and highlight, italicize and bold it, if you will. When we move forward with our policies in our state with regards to climate, it's not just about CO2 reduction. Obviously, that's the overall arching goal. It's about clean energy investments in technologies. It's about growing this economy. It's about showing Washington, D.C., quite frankly, how to get it done and do it in such a manner that's measurable and that's verifiable. Coming back from D.C., Michael, I'll say, and I know the governor's been back there on a few occasions, and I think we share the same opinion. When you come back from D.C., it's very disconcerting, it's very distressing given the lack of innovation, the lack of bold, progressive ideas. On the issue of climate, they're literally having the debate. It's almost like, is it evolution or is it creationism? And that's the kind of debate they're having in Washington, D.C. on the issue of climate with regards to the naysayers. I get some of the folks who have a business model that they believe will be challenged on any progressive, far-reaching carbon reduction policy. But in reality, what's at stake now is our economy, and what's at stake now is our generation of young children and many generations to come. So bet on California, invest on California. We're a resilient state. We fall down, but we always get back up through our trials and tribulations.
Senator, let me ask you a quick question before I go to the governor. California was the first state in the country where the majority of children that were born in the year 2000 were from parents and ancestors from Latin America. Today, the majority of citizens in California under 20, majority of people living here under 20 are of Latin American ancestry. Is this an issue that you believe is an interest to the Latin American community in California?
Well, I think it's for the whole country. You know, I being the youngest child of a single immigrant mother with a third grade education, you know, my mother was a housekeeper in La Jolla, California, and she probably cleaned a lot of hedge fund investors' homes back in the day. You know, you may be here present today as we speak. But the president in his State of State speech, I think earlier in January, talked about America's future. And I think with a lot of legitimacy, we can say that California today is America's future. So what we do and how we do it with regards to immigration, immigrants, to changing demographics, Latinos and Asian Americans will speak volumes of how the country goes in the next few years.
Thank you, Senator. Governor, 70% we study of every change in America starts in California. What message would you like to give the people that are watching this on the internet, here in person, and around the world?
Well, the message I would give is to beware of the polarizers. There are always lots of problems. And California has plenty of them, long-term liabilities and racial disparities and inequality and environmental stuff. I can give you 5, 10 more things. But you got to look at the overall thrust. What's the direction? I think the direction, when you look at the creation of business, when the creation of new cultural norms and the imagination of Hollywood, there is that forging ahead that reaches all the way back to the pioneering days. Now, my great-grandfather came here on a stage in 1852, and it was tough, and he made it. And his daughter, my grandmother, had my father, had a governor, 2 governors in the family. My grandmother never went past the 4th grade. But these were smart people, and they were tough people. And that's what California was made of. Smart people, tough people. The challenges ahead are different than what the pioneers faced, or even what we faced 30 years ago. They're complicated, they're sophisticated, they're interactive with all sorts of mutual dependencies. And they have a lot of government involved in it that's needed, some of it not. So I would just say this, try to see things as they are, not in the dark rhetorical glow of what one side or the other wants you to believe. Because I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. California, the government, life, meaning of it all. And I think that we have a special opportunity here, whether you're a business person or a teacher or a fish and game warden or a banker. This is a very exciting place. And while we deal with our problems, keep our feet on the ground, but let's keep our eyes on the stars.
And let's keep our hopes in the air. Thank you, Governor, for your leadership. Thank you, Senator, for joining us.
Thank you very much. This was a wonderful way, wonderful way to set the tone and a wonderful thing to do to add to this conference. Well, now we're going to switch gears slightly for something also very much California, but that's become increasingly global. And to set the stage for our next panel, while the stage is being reset and the panel is coming on, let's take a look at a little video.
For Hollywood, it's a brave new world. In the last decade, the rise of a new global middle class, led by China, India, and Latin America, has created vast new markets in entertainment, with explosive results. With international markets now accounting for up to 70% of the studio's total receipts, Hollywood has quickly adapted.
The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Hindi mein.
Look for more action-adventure films, especially blockbuster sequels. Greater diversity in characters will better reflect the culture of foreign markets. Original content will continue to come from the bestseller lists of both books and video games. Worldwide demand for American television has also never been greater.
Corriste 6 calles y media. Será mejor que seas de un...
パリッシュが餌食になったと。
餌食って。
È crollata quando me ne sono andato.
Grazie, Carrie.
The rise in the number of cable and satellite stations has coincided with a proliferation of new devices and screens. Networks are beginning to cut the cable and offer their services a la carte.
CBS is changing the choices you have to watch your favorite shows at home or now on a mobile device. It's called CBS All Access.
All of these trends add up to more platforms, more content, more diversity, and a lot more revenue.
Well, we said we would start it off with a blast. And so here we are, and here is our closing panel of this doubleheader. Our moderator today is Julia Burstein. She's the LA-based media and entertainment reporter at CNBC with a special focus on the intersection of business and technology. So, Julia, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us, and thanks to the members of this panel to talk about a massive transformation in the movie industry and the television business and media as a whole, the globalization and also the advent of so many new technologies that are changing the way content is distributed and consumed. And the particular focus today is on globalization, or as Peter Rice put it, the Hollywoodization of the world. And we were talking about this all beforehand, and his description of what was going on was less that Hollywood is becoming global and more that the world is becoming more Hollywoodized. So can you tell us a little bit what you meant by that?
Well, I think I was talking about the sense that Hollywood content is able to travel globally, and it's able to speak to people in different languages and different cultures around the world. And it competes with local product, which is very, very powerful in its individual territories. But the one place in the world that has been able to really have global product comes from Hollywood. And my feeling was because Hollywood has always attracted the greatest storytellers from around the world to come here. And the best writers come to work with the best directors and actors and cinematographers. And they come here to Hollywood, and then their product travels back home. And that was sort of my view of why Hollywood is such a powerful place and drives such a great content engine.
Michael, how has the growing market for Hollywood content changed the way you approach movie making?
Well, I think when you look now at a movie more and more and try and understand the architecture of the movie, and Nina could speak to this even better than I could with the giant success of Hunger Games, you're really trying to understand whether 2/3 of the world outside the United States is going to appreciate it as much as inside the United States. And that has all sorts of effects on everything from casting to story. Don't you think?
I do. I think I mean, I do think that, generally speaking, the thing that is the page turner, the story you can't put down, the thing where at any given moment you know what you want, you know what you fear, well done, those stories generally will travel, and then there are exceptions where they won't. So something that's extremely regional might not travel, or something that's about sports. I would love to make sports movies when I was at Disney, and we quickly learned that, you know, sports movie, nobody cares about sports other than their own. But I think that many of those, the big ideas, the big characters, the big aspirations, they organically want to be told on a scale where they can be consumed universally.
It was interesting, you were talking about the big fight next week that Showtime is distributing along with HBO, and you've sold the rights overseas, which is surprising. You know, Merriweather versus Pacquiao, you wouldn't think that necessarily would translate very well overseas.
No, I think boxing is one of those sports that goes everywhere, and I think obviously America's been waiting for this fight for decades, but boxing is a pretty worldwide thing, and it's been very interesting to see the reaction throughout the world. And these are two guys who are known all over the place. Obviously, in the Philippines, I don't think there's going to be a household that won't be tuned to this fight on Saturday night. And you know, you get an event like this, it really transcends everything.
And speaking of sports, Fox has the next couple of World Cups. That's certainly a global audience.
Sure, sports has an intense, passionate audience around the world, and soccer is the biggest sport in terms of traveling around the world. So the World Cup's very important to us, and you know, as is the UEFA Champions League. It translates language, and there's an intensity of passion for it. So, you know, it's a big piece of what we've been investing in both here and throughout the world. And Fox has the largest, I believe, the largest foreign channel base of any of the U.S. media companies. What works best, and what's different in terms of your global approach? Our channel base is very big. It's something we've been working on for about 15 years now, and Sony has also another very big international set of channels. And it's very much here. It's a combination of, you know, we have Fox Sports, you know, across Latin America and Asia, where it's the most strongest. We have some premium channels across Asia and Latin America, mainly powered by Hollywood content. So it's a combination of sort of global sports, Hollywood content, and then as we've built them out, you know, started to get into local production, because local production is very important. So it's a mixture of factual, scripted, sports, local production, in much the way that we've built channels in this country. It's started 10 or 15 years behind. No, Les, I know, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, local production does become more and more important, yet, as Peter was saying earlier, the Hollywood product, the product that we deliver throughout the world, I think stands above most of the others. It certainly does in television. I think it does in film as well. The fact that an NCIS not only is the biggest drama in America, it's the biggest drama throughout the rest of the world. And at certain times, historically, certain countries have tried to limit the amount of American content that can be brought in. And they've tried to compete on a local basis, and they haven't been able to do that. They haven't been able to deal with the kind of quality that we do, because I think right now in America, between what's going on in cable, what's going on in network, what's going on in premier cable, it really is the golden age of television. There's more great product now than has ever existed before. And you started getting into this, and with new technology, it is so deliverable all over the world that America's presence, the Hollywood content, has become more and more important.
So when you're watching all the TV shows I know you're watching now as part of pilot season, are you thinking about what will translate, or are the shows that are the best here, are those also going to translate necessarily?
No, obviously you're looking at what can translate. As you're dealing in a universe, and obviously our business is based, number one, on getting the viewers here and getting that advertiser base, but frankly, the back end is now becoming more and more important. And that back end obviously includes syndication or SVOD here like Netflix, but the international marketplace has become bigger and bigger and better, and it becomes an important part of the quotient. We started a process a few years ago, which everybody else is doing as well, which is we now can do original dramas in the summer. Something that we could never have thought of doing before because the economics of summer viewing was so low that you couldn't afford to do it. But now the advertising becomes far less important. So you start a show and you say, okay, the advertising is going to be 1/3, then you do a Netflix or an Amazon deal, that becomes a big chunk, and then you add in international, and suddenly those summer programs, like Under the Dome, become profitable from day one. It's a brand new model.
And for you, Michael, I know your TV business is huge. When you think about foreign sales of that TV content, how do you factor that in when you're deciding what type of content to create?
Well, to what Les is saying, I mean, it is the golden age of television, certainly for drama, and drama does play all over the world. And so when we look at the financials of a show that we might be making and hopefully selling to Les or somebody else here in the United States, you'd say to yourself, a lot of the upside, in addition to selling it on to an SVOD service here, would be selling it outside the United States. Comedy, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, comedy still, for the most part, in television at least, plays very, very domestic. And that's true of, comedy around the world. With one exception, which Peter has, which is The Simpsons, which is, if we do have a big network, a series of networks outside the United States, the clutterbuster is really The Simpsons.
Yeah.
That works everywhere in the world, it seems.
Amazing.
Homer is a god.
That's off, yeah.
Or at least he wrote about the gods, and here on the cartoon he is a god.
I think something also that's changed in the feature space, really in the last decade or so, is that you used to be able to look at a movie which is, it needed to have either foreign appeal or a long life on home video. So you could choose to make something that was domestically driven. Maybe it was a family movie of a certain type with no movie stars, or, and not a lot of spectacle, or a sports movie, which you knew if it's about football, it's probably not going to travel. And even soccer movies, you have to have that. You have a few every now and again, but it's just been a genre that tends not to travel that well. But you knew, well, that's fine. If you contain the cost, you'll have your life on home video, and it might overperform there and underperform internationally. As that overperformance no longer really exists, it's a squeeze play. And so now you can't really say it's either or. You always need to look at only a very, very inexpensive movie can afford not to travel.
And how does piracy affect your decision-making, especially when it comes to overseas, where piracy is an even bigger threat?
I see it emerging in, you always ask with any story, really from the second you crack open a script or a book, does it demand communal viewing? Given that television is so good, that most people, like myself, from the feature side now have the passport to travel back and forth, which we didn't used to. People used to be a TV creator or a film creator. Now there's a real fluidity. When you ask about a movie, does it demand communal viewing? And in the places where piracy is the greatest, you have to up the ante with 3D, with IMAX, with things that you simply cannot get at home. And so in China, 3D becomes really important. In Russia, 3D becomes really important. You have to make the experience of sitting in the dark with strangers ultimately more compelling than the experience of sitting alone on your couch, knowing that there are some really great things you could watch on your couch.
Michael, they were in the clip earlier. There was some Spider-Man in there, and that's probably a good example of that sort of big spectacle event. How much more of that will we see? Do you think there will be sort of a bifurcation movie industry to that, and then the kind of stuff that's easier to watch at home on your couch?
Well, I mean, we talked about in the green room the fact that you were remarking that folks had mentioned last year, I think it was Spielberg and Zemeckis who commented, or Lucas rather, had commented that there was going to be this bifurcation. I think there is to a degree. I think certainly you're going to see an enormous summer this year of huge, huge, huge movies, and that have big, big budgets. But I also think, frankly, it's not just small movies on the other end of the spectrum. You can make a movie that sits in the middle as long as it knows what its market is. And You know, if you're targeting a specific market with a movie that sits in the middle, actually you can be very successful not just here but elsewhere in the world. And that's proven itself out. And also, I can make an argument in some of the bigger franchises, Fast and Furious being one of them. I was listening to Donna Langley this morning talk about her slate, that a lot of the franchises that Universal has actually did not start out as big blockbusters. They grew over time. And we're seeing that phenomenon occur as well.
And do you think the target audience has changed for years? People always talked about sort of the young male as the target audience with the ideas that that guy might bring his girlfriend along. But now you're making movies with strong female leads. It seems like you're targeting a much bigger pie.
You know, I always thought that the targeting of the young man was BS, say, for large rooms.
It's true.
Certainly when I was at Disney, we knew that women were our bread and butter. I think it's just has been a long period of collective stupidity that is maybe finally starting to give way to the obvious, which is that half of the people on the planet are women, and therefore they might actually, as they have great influence over what they buy in the household, they might actually have great influence over what movies they see. And besides, they are not as distracted between video games, sports, and porn. It's hard to get a young man's attention. So I think women, they go in groups, they go repeatedly. You know, you see something like Titanic and everybody acts so surprised. Oh my God, look at the success of Titanic, driven by women, and then it's as though they forget it again the next year.
So women aren't into porn, is what you're saying.
Well, I know 50 Shades of Grey are not. 50 Shades of Grey are definitely not that.
It sounds like you think that's starting to change.
I do think it is starting to change. It is a ridiculously slow process of change, given how obvious it is over and over again that women can drive an enormous amount of business.
Michael, you're nodding.
No, I agree. I think we as an industry were incredibly slow to react. What Nina's saying is 100% the case. If you look at the biggest movies out there over the last few years, even ones, you know, a movie like Gravity is completely based on a female hero, you know, and that's not a female hero who's not an obvious hero. And that doesn't even speak to things like The Hunger Games or endless numbers of movies, not just action movies, but comedies that have played to a largely female audience. And whether it's because guys were in the seat that were making the decision, or whether it was because we were just dumb, or whatever the case might have been, we ignored a big audience for a very, very long time. Or some of us did, I should say. Nina didn't, but some of us did.
Sorry, do you want to say something?
No, I'm just agreeing.
You alluded to this with this idea that the line between television and movies has disappeared. In terms of the type of content, who the content creators are, who the actors are. We see it on Showtime. You see shows on Showtime that could be movies in terms of the quality and the production value and all of that. And the exception is that theater experience. So around the world, people are watching movies, TV, whatever it is, on phones. So the screen has gotten much smaller. And I'm wondering how that, sort of the different devices that people are consuming on, changes the content creation process.
I think that, say, there are certain experiences which are more enjoyable in the dark with strangers. It's more fun to laugh with other people, for sure. There's nothing worse than showing a comedy for the first time in a tiny group of executives. You know, it's brutal. You want a big crowd. You want to be with a bunch of strangers where you feel free to laugh, too, amongst strangers in a way that you might not in other situations. Being scared is more fun in the dark with strangers. Something like 50 Shades of Grey appears to be more fun in the dark with strangers. Big spectacle, I think it's interesting because I think you're starting to see with things like Daredevil and a lot of, you know, Game of Thrones, those are big spectacles as well. But there's a certain type of awe, a shock and awe experience that is still more fun in the dark with strangers. And so whether it's filmmakers pursuing sort of new techniques, the way someone like Ang Lee does, or taking 3D to new places, taking the experience of spectacle to a place where you'd rather, that nothing substitutes. And you also see it in theaters, making the theatrical experience more of an event.
Yeah, and some of the new high-tech stuff, Michael and I were just talking about 4D theaters with movement and sound and smells and all sorts
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not widespread, but it's certainly out there.
Yeah. So do you see the line between TV and movies disappearing in terms of the variety of content?
I think certainly the quality of the content, the line is disappearing. In the UK, it used to be actors, writers, directors would do theater, film, television, and it really wouldn't matter. Here, there was a little bit more discrimination. Now with what's happening at HBO and Showtime and FX, you're getting the high-quality actors, the people who will do movies, and I think when you look at what the premier cable networks are doing, I obviously am prejudiced, but I do think the work, by and large, in television is better than the majority work that's done in feature films. You look at a Game of Thrones or a Homeland or a Mad Men, they're pretty extraordinary. They really are, and there is a lot of it. And the reason is you're getting the actors and directors saying, you know what, I can deal with doing 10 or 12 episodes. It's a different animal than doing a network show, which is you're committing to 22 or 24 episodes. So nowadays, the unfortunate thing is you're getting an awful lot of people who you'll offer a network show, and they say, I'd really do that if it was only 13 episodes. Economically, that doesn't work for us. But qualitatively, there's never been a better time. The competition is extreme, but there's extraordinary work being done.
Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's also a sense of a different level of storytelling in the actual structure of the stories. Now, one of these great cable dramas, one of these great TV dramas is really you could argue it's a 70-hour movie. So you get to explore characters, the writers really get to explore things in a different way, where a movie is a very defined story that you're telling. It might be a trilogy, but you're telling it over a 2-hour period with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think actors especially are really enjoying the fact that I can explore a character, and it's not about visual effects, it's about the acting, it's about the words, it's about the story. And I think that's enlarged the world for creative people, and I think the audience is benefiting from that. I think we do live in an amazing time. There's so much, you can't even find the time to watch it anymore.
And the fact
that, in my opinion, and when you ask about devices, what Peter is describing, I think in large part was brought about by technology, and it's really the first time that technology has actually creatively affected movies and television, perhaps since color. Because take a show like The Wire. The Wire today would have been, in my opinion, a sensation, and the simple reason that it wasn't was because if you missed 2 or 3 episodes, it was like ripping chapters out of a book. You might as well not read the book. Well, along comes DVR, which has its own problems as far as advertising, and Netflix or other SVOD services, and people feel as though they can make an investment in a show knowing that they can fill in the middle. And you get the added effect that you can watch the previous season to catch up with it if you haven't seen it. So all of a sudden, you have these very open-ended dramas, to Peter and Les's point, that you get great writers coming to, great actors, great directors. And it's really a function of technology, because without DVRs or SVOD services, that wouldn't have been possible.
And we used to do technology in many ways defined how we distributed things. So theaters was about a technology of how you moved it, and television was broadcast, and therefore there was no way to catch up and watch it. So I agree. I think technology has changed storytelling.
And to your point, we just launched this service called CBS All Access, which is our digital service. And it offers 3 things. It offers library, old library, going from I Love Lucy to Star Trek. It offers live television. You can turn on CBS Live. And the third component is catch-up. Current series on the air, the earlier episodes, or last year's. 80% of the people are doing it for catch-up.
Wow.
80%. That's why they're signing it up for. It's not for live. Few people still like I Love Lucy. That's good. But it's primarily to catch up, and that's exactly to your point. And this couldn't have existed 3 years ago, 5 years ago.
And so CBS All Access, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, is considered quite revolutionary because it is an over-the-top product. It's not TV everywhere where you have to sign up and authenticate through your cable or satellite TV provider. This is for people, could be for people who do not have pay for cable TV.
It's for $5.99 a month. You can get everything that CBS offers. We call it for the super fan primarily. And, it's doing extraordinarily well. We're very pleased with it. And look, we still get paid more when you turn on Channel 2 and you're watching our full ads there. But this is a whole new model, and so wherever you want our content, we have to be there and deliver it to you.
So when you say it's doing extremely well, can you tell us how well?
No, I'm going to be like Netflix. We don't talk about our numbers. See, that way you can declare everything a hit and nobody can question you. So all we're saying is it's better than our projections were, and we're really pleased with the product.
Do you have a sense of who the people are who are subscribing to it? Or is it cord nevers, cord cutters?
It's a little bit of all of the above, but as I said, primarily it's the super fan. It's the guy who wants to catch up. It's the guy who wants to see last year's episodes of The Good Wife. So I don't know. We don't know enough to know if these are people who are cord nevers or cord cutters. Obviously, you go onto a college campus today, no one has television. There are no TVs there. So you have to offer a product that's there. HBO, I think, was very smart with their HBO Now product. I think it's a great product, and it's a great idea, and we're doing the same thing with Showtime. In a few months, we're going to announce very similar things to what they have. But there are 10 million people who aren't signed up to anything, so we're going to get them.
And so what do you think you've learned from the launch of HBO Now that you'll apply to your Showtime product in terms of pricing?
I love the showmanship. The idea of announcing it along with Tim Cook on stage at Apple when they were doing the watch, I thought was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant marketing. And the HBO product, look, they tied it into Game of Thrones, which clearly is their most successful show in history that a lot of people were waiting for. And I think that was a great idea. They're going to expand the universe. The idea is with HBO and Showtime, and they're both very successful financially, you can't get to them most times until you already have basic cable. So you can't check the box till you've already spent $120. The idea is to be able to spend $10 on Showtime without getting anything else.
And you really think it's just going to target those 10 million people who don't pay for cable and not get people to cut their cable subscription?
Everything we do is going to be through our partners.
So packaged with broadband.
Exactly. Packaged with broadband done through Comcast or direct or, all of our partners will be. We're not going to go direct to consumer with the Showtime product like we're doing with the CBS product.
Interesting. There's been so much news lately about over-the-top services. Sling TV, we've been talking about. Verizon has their new custom TV bundle, the slimmed-down bundle. What does this all mean for the future of CBS?
Well, CBS has a different point of view than a lot of our competitors that maybe even my friend Peter has, which is we primarily are two major networks, CBS and Showtime. So the world of the smaller bundle is not scary to us. It's actually potentially a good thing where we get a bigger piece of the pie. Look, it's coming. You hear it over and over again. Most homes are getting 150 channels, of which they watch 12 to 15 of them, and they don't want to be paying these huge cable bills for a lot of channels they're not watching. Now, some of the other companies, my competitors who have 30 cable channels, may be disagreeing with that. I know Disney is suing Verizon over ESPN not being part of that. But I think it's the wave of the future. Sony has a product they're introducing. Apple's talking about a product. Verizon already announced it. Sling did. The 150-channel universe is changing. You're going to be able to get different packages, and once again, we're going to be in all of them.
What do you think, Peter?
Long term, we're really excited about the future. I mean, Sony has a product that's a fantastic product that our channels are in. There's a transition going on. I think in 5 years, 10 years, almost everyone will get their television delivered to them over IP, and it's going to be a much more one-to-one world. And I think for the people who make and own really fantastic content, I think that's a tremendous world that we're going to move into. I think mediocrity it's going to be really hard for that content because I don't think people are going to passionately desire mediocre content. So it's going to be a bumpy transition, but I think on a subscription basis, being able to get closer to the consumer, to be able to work with a broader range of wholesalers, I think will be good for us. And I think on an advertising basis, it will be good. I think it'll mean less ads, at more efficient prices for everybody, for the consumer, for the seller, and for the brands who want to reach, targeted people.
What about the slimmed down bundles that don't include many of your cable channels?
Well, we've worked, probably 5 years ago, we had 20 or 25 channels, and we'd gone through a world of linear channel space, and you kept trying to expand what you had. And for the past 5 years, we've really been trying to focus on 5 brands. So Fox, Fox Sports, National Geographic, FX, and Fox News. And really trying to say anything else goes into those brands. In our apps, we only have 5 apps. Those are the apps. And we think each one of those brands has really compelling content and will be in all the different bundles. We think they're a fantastic value.
So is Fox going to sue Verizon just like ESPN did about the custom TV bundle?
I'm not going to talk about ESPN's lawsuit. I think we will we'll work with Verizon. We'll look at what they're doing. We'll see how it evolves. We've been trying to offer our distributors some flexibility. On the margins, we think some of the skinny bundles don't necessarily offer a good value. I think you look at this particular bundle of $55 plus $10 plus $10, pretty fast you're at $75 again. And I think consumers will say, well, do I want to pay $75 for 20 channels, or do I want to pay $80 for 100 channels? Or buy the Sony product for $55. So I think there's a lot going on in the space. It'll be bumpy. I think for the people who have compelling content, I think we'll be fine.
So are you planning to do a direct-to-consumer offering like CBS All Access?
Well, we have Hulu, so we've been doing that for a few years. I think Les has taken it to the next level because it's got live TV in there. I think it's a really exciting product. And I think we have to offer our content in lots of different ways. And I think some will be wholesale and some will be retail. Right now, we've invested in Hulu, and we'll look at other ways in the future.
Hulu just made a bunch of big announcements at the New Fronts. I guess it was yesterday, about all this new content they're bringing in. And I know Hulu's co-managed by Fox. What role does that play in the future? Where does that fit into the TV ecosystem? Now they have all this new content from AMC and the likes of them.
And CW and CBS.
CW.
And, we think it's a very exciting space. We love Hulu. We think it's a great product. And when we decided, as Disney and us, not to sell last year, at that moment, we announced we were going to make a big investment in content. We just bought Seinfeld from Sony.
Thank you.
And it's a fantastic way for consumers to access content. And consumers love it, and they love CBS All Access. They love a sense of, okay, I can choose what I want. The interface is very fluid. So we're going to continue investing in it and buying what we think is the best content.
Peter hit it right. The key is having content that people have to have. Then they don't cut you out of your bundle, no matter what size the bundle is. As Peter said, Fox has now presented 5 different packages that are must-have content. There are a lot of things out there that are not must-have, that people can live without. So your goal, our goal as content providers, is to have the best content that people have to have, and you're going to be fine.
With all this talk about going direct to consumer, it seems like brands are more important than ever. Hunger Games is a good example of that. And then also the role of celebrity. How do you see those 2 factors playing into your decision-making about the movies you're making and how to market them?
Well, I do think that the notion of celebrity is changing. If you were to ask a group of young people to list their 20 favorite celebrities, at least 10 of them probably would be people we haven't ever even heard of because of the advent of the YouTube star and of things like Makers or big screen and a full screen rather. And so I think that the notion of the accessible celebrity has become very relevant to a generation, whereas we the traditional celebrity maybe has a connection going way back to the days of, the grand movie star. And I think that's really shifting, and that there's a desire people have for their own participation. I think it's another reason why, television has become, in its own way, a communal experience, because you can tweet while you're watching, which you don't do in a movie. You can be connecting with your friends, followers, et cetera, kind of while you're taking in a story and have your own things to say about it. And so that porousness, I think, is a change agent. And exactly how it shifts the game, I'm not sure. I think it has contributed to the sense that the brand becomes more important than the movie star. So you can change Spider-Man, who plays Spider-Man, because people are going to go see Spider-Man more than they're going to go see the actor who is playing Spider-Man. And it's still about great casting. Someone like Jen Lawrence, I can't imagine Hunger Games, even with its very popular books, being nearly the success that it's been without Jen Lawrence being the perfect person to play that role, and a very modern celebrity, a very down-to-earth, accessible celebrity. But I think that it's a very changing area, and I think increasingly studios realize, that the brand certainly means more than the movie star, and there are fewer and fewer movie stars who reliably mean anything on the one hand, and yet they still provide a degree of comfort for international sales that's a little bit at odds with itself, I think, right now. And I think it's an area that's in flux.
Michael, what do you think?
Well, I think particularly what Nina says is on the international component is true, and is that the idea of celebrity in this country, I think, is different from the idea of celebrity outside of the United States, especially places like Asia. And so people who are brands effectively seem to have a longer life, for now, I don't know how long that will stay the case, in Europe, in Asia. And so to Nina's point, when you are constructing these movies, you still, at some level, say to yourself, okay, a celebrity, a person of note will give you a bigger international sale than would be the case here in the United States. And that creates an imbalance. I will say, though, on the whole, and I think that also speaks to the point about Jennifer Lawrence, when you put a celebrity in a role that the audience does not want to see them in, it really doesn't matter how powerful the brand is. You are really messing with the whole equation, and they will reject it out of hand. Yeah. That's the other problem with celebrity. They expect certain things from actors and actresses that they know well, and if you put them completely out of character in certain scenarios, that actually works against the movie.
Nina mentioned the rise of these YouTube celebrities with tens and tens of millions of fans. Do you ever think we'll see them cross over into the traditional Hollywood world?
I don't know. I think that something I've been thinking about lately, and it's still nascent, is I think it's actually more about us coming to them than them coming to us, because what they do isn't to act. It's not about being a great actor. It's about a personality. And certainly Hollywood likes to use them to market and publicize product. But I think that the notion of, like, say, sort of a more porous form of storytelling, there is now a greater and greater demand for content, even from, like, say, the entities like Makers or Fullscreen. And so is there a yet fully understood or explored form of content that makes use of those types of personalities, puts them in stories that have narrative drive.
Sort of build stories around them.
Build stories around them, and allow for the porousness, the fact that the viewer can interact, that you can type something in, which you still can't do to change the outcome of a story on film or television, but that you do when you're watching something, like American Idol. I think that there may be sort of yet more chapters of, say, a kind of porous storytelling, but I would imagine that those kinds of celebrities they're best used doing what they do well and being who they are, an authentic self that people connect to, and then figuring out how to create narratives that maybe make use of those personalities.
I think Nina, I think Nina makes a very good point, and it goes even beyond that. One of the reasons I think why right now making television and film has become both more complicated and more interesting is because there's so many ways that people can actually watch whatever it is we're making. So to what Nina said earlier, if you're going to make a movie, you better make sure that's something that people want to see in a big experience. The same goes now for television, or a different version of it. So there's these two terms. Well, one's not a term. They have the binge viewing, but there's also what I sort of loosely call tantric viewing, which is the way we all grew up watching television, where you drag it out over the thing and you spend 6 days talking about what the next episode will be, which has its own unique pleasure and its own version of publicity that goes with it, because you get reviews over those 6 days and everything else. So now and then there's the version of the kinds of things that Nina's describing, where maybe there's a more interactive component. So all of a sudden, sitting in a chair when a piece of material shows up, based upon how you want the audience to view it, it can be a big movie. It can be a show that maybe you suspect in the back of your mind should go to Netflix that will be binge watched. It can be going on a broadcast network where it will be tantrically viewed, or whatever you want to call it, or it may have an interactive component. And those were questions you would have never asked a decade ago when all those options weren't available to you.
You had a unique experiment with The Interview, which was obviously under very unusual circumstances, but the decision to...
Sort of like the Titanic. I'm not going to call that an experiment.
Yeah.
That's not where you want to test out the life raft.
Not an experiment that will be really repeated. But this idea of releasing it in multiple formats and allowing people to watch it on the big screen, on the small screen, Crackle, video on demand. I wonder if there are any lessons that you learned from that.
I don't think so, because, it became such an issue of free speech in this country, and such an issue of demand to see it because people felt that they were being prevented by a foreign power from seeing it, that it took on a whole different notion. I went to a bunch of screenings in independent movie theaters here in Los Angeles, and people stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance or sang the national anthem before a Seth Rogen comedy. And as Seth turned to me and said, "I'm Canadian." So I actually think in that instance it was, I don't use the term unique loosely, it was unique. And I don't think there is a great deal to be learned from that. I think the theatrical experience is very important and vital to the movie industry, and I'm not sure that simultaneous experiment across the platforms is something to be repeated.
So you don't think we'll see day-and-date releases?
Well, I don't. No. I think the theatrical experience has to be protected. But and what we experienced at Sony, I think, is not a lesson. Well, there are other lessons having to do with email and other things, but not having to do with simultaneous release.
I think we're all up here trying to get our arms around what our business is, how we're delivering our product. The truth is, it has changed so rapidly. We did our balance sheet. We have our earnings call coming up, and about 40% of our earnings didn't exist 5 years ago.
Wow.
That's how different
and,
the world.
And give us a sense. That's net revenue.
Well,
Netflix,
it's the Netflix, it's the Amazon, which is a large portion. It's expanded international territories. It's retransmission consent, which we weren't paid 5 years ago. It's the payment we're getting from affiliates. It's CBS All Access. It's CBS.com. It's CBSN, which is our news channel online. Businesses that truly did not exist. Now, at its core, and I really believe this, content is the king, and the content is the same as it was 1,000 years ago. It's still about great storytelling and great heart and connection with your audience. But how it's delivered, how it's spoken about, you talk about celebrity, it's very different than it was a short time ago. And everything we're talking about, if you had the same group of people here 3 years from now, it's going to be a very different conversation.
So do you think that your revenue mix is going to continue to change that dramatically?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what's exciting.
I can't wait to hear.
You don't know what the next thing is. You know, there are so many new ways of selling your product. You talked about piracy. China is going to open up. China's going to open up and be a central part of our revenue stream. They're going to start watching our television shows. Well, actually, they're already watching our television shows. They're going to start paying us for it. You know, Big Bang Theory is the #1 show in China, yet Warner Brothers and CBS has not received a penny from it. But that too will change. That too will change, and you know, the world will embrace our content. But so any pronouncements should be held back.
And even the core of your business, this live viewing of CBS, is being changed by social media. I mean, how do you work with social media, or how important is it to that live experience?
Obviously, social media is very important. The shared experience, and it especially happens during events. You know, the Grammys is like the #1 show for us in terms of the dual screen. Obviously, we have a lot of football on our network, as does Peter. That becomes very important, the conversations during football games. And it's another step of people getting involved in your TV shows. It used to be 20 years ago, you used to use the phrase the water cooler. Oh, let's put on a great show. Who shot JR? Let's go to the water cooler, and everybody's going to be talking about it for months and months at work. Now they're talking about it online immediately. So that's important when people are doing something. When a main character is shot on The Good Wife, the place went crazy. The place went crazy. That's a new thing. And that obviously becomes more and more important to all of our product.
Peter, how do you guys leverage social?
I think for everything that Les said, I mean, the exciting thing is there's billions of people walking around essentially with a television in their pocket now. You know, I was going to reach in and pull mine out, but I left it off stage. And the way that can then amplify the conversation, the discourse around films and movies, and then people have the ability to access them. And I look at some of the numbers for, you know, Gotham and Empire and Last Man on Earth, and the number of people who watch those episodes are the equivalent of where we were 15 years ago when we only had broadcast. But they now watch it in 20 different ways. And when you accumulate it, they're massive numbers. And so I'm really optimistic that there's still a hunger for storytelling. And I think it's exciting, all these different ways in which people can tweet and Vine and do things that are around content that excites them.
And you're particularly experimenting with technology when it comes to sports. Tell us about some of the stuff you're doing there.
Sports is always fun. I mean, you get to do things live. We're doing... At the US Open, we're using for the first time, some live 3D broadcast, in which you can be there. It's really the best seat in the house. And I watched recently, I love soccer. I grew up in England. I sat behind the goal in Old Trafford, and you can look over here and you watch the corner kick come in. And there's places at Chambers Bay for the US Open where you'll be able to go from different greens and different tees and move around the course. And that's a really exciting way that 3D technology and transmission is making things. You could sit at on the floor at a Clippers game next to Steve Ballmer, which is really fun. So I think that technology, again, it's getting us closer to the storytelling, closer to the action, and I think we live in a remarkable time.
What do you think about 3D, Nina?
I think 3D it's really come a long way. I think it started out as being something that was about really feeling things coming at you, and now it's much more about feeling that you're inside of the experience. We did a 3D for Mockingjay 1 in China for the reasons that we talked about, and we were really unsure about it, about how it would feel with subject matter that has the potential to feel exploitive when it's meant to always be exploring violence and yet never exploitive of violence. And I was really struck, even in this sort of first foray into it, how much the performances were dimensionalized by getting to see these wonderful actors in 3D. And it wasn't about feeling things are coming at you. It was really about feeling that you were coming at it. You were getting to be inside of it. And I think that that immersive quality is really powerful, and that the 3D has gotten so much more sophisticated than it was. But it also becomes I think, a big factor is it is a viewing option in the same way that you can choose, do I want to watch this on my iPad? Do I want to watch it on my television? Do I want to watch it on my phone? Do I want to watch it in 3D or not? I think forced 3D really aggravates people. There's still plenty of people who don't like it. They don't want to pay for it, or they just don't like it. But it's an option, and having it as a consumer's option, I think, is really important for the right kind of story, and certainly in certain markets, it's exceptionally important.
Michael, do you know what the next generation will be in terms of sort of what's next after 3D? We talked about this a little bit.
We were talking about virtual reality. I've experienced a little bit of it, and I have heard seasoned filmmakers who are people who, these are filmmakers who embrace technology. And the way they describe virtual reality to me, or what I've heard them say, is this is the first time that they've actually seen potentially the vocabulary of film change. Because they were all trained, even in 3D to an extent, although that changed it, where an audience's eye should be focused, what a close-up meant, what all these kind of things. Now, for the first time, you have the potential of telling a story in 360 degrees, and how do you get the audience to, or albeit the audience is sitting there with a goggle on, a set of goggles, how do you get them to focus their attention on something in the back? Do you have to have a character say, look over there? Well, that's a little clumsy. So if it really does do that and changes the vocabulary of not just filmmaking, but television making and all the rest, that is a big deal and will require a whole new way of people approaching the medium. And I haven't seen enough of it, or I haven't seen the breakthrough thing that would tell me, oh my goodness, this is the way they're going to do it, but I suspect it'll come along.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A question back to sort of what you were talking before about local. We were talking, we sort of started this conversation talking about the Hollywoodization of the world as opposed to the globalization of Hollywood, sort of how Hollywood content translates and is exported so well and so successfully. But we didn't really talk that much about sort of local content and the power in local content, especially now that there is growing demand, now that we're all walking around with a television in our pocket. And with so many foreign channels, Peter, I'm curious what you're seeing in those trends.
Well, local sports is very powerful, and every country has its big legacy broadcaster, and they're the #1 channels, in those countries, and that's true of France and Germany and Brazil. And the quality and the amount of money that they're putting into their productions now is having to be raised because they're having to compete with Hollywood productions. So we have a very big broadcast business in Turkey, which has a tremendous amount of production, and they're using a lot of the techniques that we have here to make Turkish novellas, and they're beginning to travel a little bit. But it's still something that we have to compete with, and I think it's difficult sometimes for American companies. You can't just go in and start a channel and expect that it's going to be #1 because you have these legacy, local businesses.
And you, Michael, what do you think about the local production issue? Is there a tension between the rise of local native language content and Hollywood content, or do you think these two will always coexist?
I think they'll always coexist. I think they find their natural level in different countries at different levels, and both in television and in film, and sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes in the case of India it's disproportionately local. It's 85% local, and it hasn't really moved in all these very many years. But I think I think at some point, at some level there is globalization, and at another level people want to see people or hear people who look and sound like they do, and they want to hear a show that's been shot in Hindi, or they want to see a French program, and there's a certain market for that, and then there's a certain market for CSI or Hunger Games, and they can both coexist. And what we have to be concerned about at a level are quotas as Hollywood, both for television production and film, because we should let the market find its own level. And typically, when it does find its own level, the local producers do well and Hollywood does well. It doesn't do either of us particular good by keeping Hollywood product out in an effort to force the local audience to watch whatever is being produced locally. That I don't think has proven a successful experiment. To what Les was, I think, referring to earlier.
Yeah. We've seen a surge of announcements recently about Chinese money coming in to Hollywood production. And there's been a lot of talk about sort of the surge of foreign financing coming in to Hollywood, and particularly money from China. And I'm wondering, Nina, if you think that's going to, there's always a new investor for Hollywood, born every minute, but if you think that this recent spate of foreign investment is going to change the type of content, or if you think these investors are really just looking to play in sort of the traditional Hollywood game?
Well, I think that part of it is a reflection of the reality that this is a really giant growing market, and there will be increasing upside. I know for us, we were very excited. We are developing a project based on a book called Crazy Rich Asians, and it is an English language book. It is a romantic comedy. It is really kind of what a Richard Curtis, Four Weddings and a Funeral, is as a British film with, you hope, universal appeal in the way that it can be about a British cast of characters and yet travel as an international romantic comedy. This is sort of the Chinese equivalent of that, but in the case of this material, it's about characters from Singapore and an American Chinese-born woman who falls in love with a guy who is in essence Singapore royalty who's been educated in the States. And so it reflects actually, I think, a lot of issues that are relevant to, all of the people who come from China to be educated in the States and then do or don't go back home. And so it has, I think, a lot of pertinence to that audience. But to us, it's just a very, one of the things you go to the movies for is to be transported, is to be taken to a place you haven't been before. And so I think we hope that something like that is a next chapter in the way that a European locale has, or European cast can oftentimes, something like Harry Potter, nobody thought that, Harry Potter needed to be Americanized to be great. It's a phenomenal book. The proper way to adapt it was exactly as it was adapted, to be true to its source material. And the fact that they were all British was completely universal in its appeal, and yet it brought a lot of Hollywood values, Hollywood production value, Hollywood storytelling to its still British, underlying qualities. And so something like Crazy Rich Asians, maybe start to see more of that, that speaks to an international audience with an all-Asian cast. In the past, if you tried to do something like that, somebody would say, well, but can't you make the protagonist, a white girl from America? And, in this case, it will be an all-Asian cast. And we think that there's a lot of potential for something like that.
It's certainly a trend to watch. And, we talk about the growing globalization, the increasing demand overseas, and then also the changing distribution methods. I'm curious sort of what the predictions are among you guys that 2 years from now, what the next generation of trends will be. Where will we be 2 years from now? Not a year from now, that's too soon.
Trends in technology, content, distribution.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like Peter said, he thinks that all content is going to be, television is going to come over the internet, not over, eventually, over cable.
Well, that clearly is coming. That clearly is coming, and you're going to go home and you're not going to know whether it's on the internet or your cable or your satellite or whatever it is.
And I don't think it's of much consequence. I mean,
correct.
Television was first broadcast, and then broadcast and cable, and then broadcast and cable and satellite, and then broadcast and cable and satellite and telcos. People love TV. They love movies, they love TV, they love storytelling. And that's why I'm optimistic and excited.
It's all about the content.
Content is king, says Les Moonves. Yeah.
I'm with Les. I think that there's, in some ways, the prediction should be that there will be less and less room for mediocrity, that we have to keep taking our game to the next level. There are plenty of choices. You have to tell great stories that actually mean something and have real human values, or nobody cares. Spectacle on its own terms isn't enough, and having tons of different modes of distribution isn't enough. You need great stories told well by great storytellers, and that'll never change, I don't think.
Michael, want the last word?
I do think that the fact that everybody's walking around with a small mobile device will affect the time that people are willing to commit to a story. And I think it's fine to sit 2 hours in a movie theater. It's fine to sit for an hour drama in front of a television set or half an hour for a comedy. I think that there's going to actually be content that's going to be created professionally in a shortened form for those devices that everybody's walking around with or on a bus with, and that may actually provide us with something that's truly different.
Interesting. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts, and thanks to the audience, and I look forward to seeing what does happen in 2 years.
Much. That was a great closing luncheon panel. We've got several sessions going on now, so we're going to ask you to please leave the ballroom so we can clean it up and get ready for the next one. Thank you, and we'll see you at the closing session too.